It started with a handshake, a dusty afternoon, a broken-down truck, and a mango vendor on the side of a rural road. Captain Ibrahim Traoré wasn't supposed to stop. His escort urged him on. The next outpost awaited. But he stepped down anyway, crouched beside the old man, and asked one simple question. "What scares you most at night?" The answer wasn't rebels. It wasn't poverty. It wasn't even hunger. It was silence. "When the trucks roll past and we don't know whose they are," the man said, "we bury our children the next morning." Traoré took out his notebook. Not for show. He wrote every name, every village mentioned, every rumor of shifting alliances and strange movements in the night. And when he returned to his unit, he didn't forget. He made calls, adjusted patrol routes, sent extra rations to a village that hadn't seen supplies in weeks, quietly, without approval. But news travels fast, not the good kind. Within days, the officers' dining hall was buzzing. "Did you hear about Captain Storytime? He's on a listening tour. Maybe he wants to run for mayor." One particularly smug colonel leaned back, swirling whiskey in his glass. "Tell Traoré we fight wars, not gather bedtime stories. Let him write a novel. I'll stick to winning battles." The laughter was loud, long, cruel. Traoré didn't respond, not in words. He returned to the road, again and again and again. He spoke to mothers who hadn't seen government aid in months, to school teachers who taught next to collapsed walls, to young men forced to choose between joining militias or starving. And they told him everything, not because he was powerful, but because he listened. One night, after a field patrol, a sergeant from his unit pulled him aside. "Captain, the things they tell you, the maps, the timings, it's more than intel. It's like they trust you more than they trust the flag." Traoré paused. "Maybe they don't separate the two anymore," he said softly. "Maybe they think trust is the only flag left standing." At headquarters, the mockery continued. But in the shadows of forgotten villages and under the roofs of broken homes, something else was forming. A network, a whisper, a hope, and no one at that officer's table even noticed. Rain poured for 6 straight days. Convoys stalled. Radios failed. Entire units were grounded, blind in the mud and fog. But Traoré's patrol? They moved like ghosts, because he knew something the generals didn't. The villagers still knew the land better than the satellites did. In one hamlet, an old woman handed him a paper map wrapped in cloth. Hand-drawn trails, hidden footpaths, river crossings that hadn't been on official records for decades. She pointed to a hill. "If they come, they'll come from there. We buried a goat to hide the tunnel entrance when the rebels passed last time. It still smells." He laughed, genuinely. But that tunnel turned out to be real. And 3 weeks later, when a rebel group attempted a sneak assault through that same ridge, Traoré's team was waiting, positioned precisely, silently, thanks to a goat and a grandmother. Word of the success reached HQ, and so did the sarcasm. A lieutenant from intelligence stood during the weekly briefing, cleared his throat, and said, "Perhaps we should launch Operation Grandmother next. I'm sure Captain Traoré has tea scheduled in Sector 4. The room erupted, except for one officer, a junior logistics analyst, who didn't laugh. Later he approached Traoré quietly in the motor bay. "Sir, the numbers don't lie. Your unit is operating at 80% less cost, 30% more effective hits, and 0 civilian complaints. How?" Traoré replied without looking up. "Because we don't fight the people. We fight for them." Back in the field, the web grew wider. Villagers no longer whispered. They spoke, freely. A fisherman reported unusual boats docked at a dried estuary. A pastor warned of outsiders posing as aid workers. A child described a convoy logo he'd memorized because it didn't match the others. Each detail small, but stacked together, they created a picture the generals didn't have, because they never asked. And still, the mockery persisted. Captain Tea Party, village watchman, local tourist, but Traoré just kept moving, quietly, patiently. Every smile they dismissed, every conversation they laughed at, every map they ignored, he turned them all into strategy. And by the time they realized what he was building, it would be too late to stop it. The first warning didn't come with a bullet. It came with a transfer request. Stamped. Approved. Immediate. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is hereby reassigned to logistics training at Central Command, effective tomorrow. It sounded like a promotion. It wasn't. It was exile, dressed in protocol. Traoré stared at the paper, then at the young courier delivering it. The boy shifted uneasily. Sir, the general said you'd understand. Traoré did. Too well. They couldn't discredit him anymore, not with his results, but they could contain him, strip him of access, move him to an office with no field contact, no villagers, no maps. Silence him. He didn't protest, didn't argue. He packed a single duffel and walked through camp like a man going on leave, not war. But that night, as he sat beside the fire with his sergeant, the wind turned. A young scout approached, breathless. Captain, the village of Dumasi was hit. 2 trucks, no insignia. They took people. Traoré didn't hesitate. He called no superiors, no requests. He simply stood. We move. Now. Technically, he had no command authority anymore, but no one questioned him, because for those soldiers, his name meant safety, his word meant movement, and the people in Dumasi weren't numbers on a map. They were neighbors, friends, voices he'd listened to. By sunrise, they reached the smoking fields. Too late to stop the raid, but not too late to chase. Using trails mapped by children and hideouts described by shepherds, they tracked the trucks to a canyon base, long believed abandoned. They found the missing, and they found something else. Inside one of the trucks, government munitions, cereals scrubbed, labels repainted, but he knew what he was looking at. Weapons meant for official operations, now in the hands of ghosts. And someone had authorized it. That night, under a half-collapsed shed, Traoré opened his notebook. He didn't write a report. He wrote a list of names, of dates, of patterns. He wasn't building a case. He was building a reckoning. By the time he returned to base, whispers had turned to unease. One general muttered, "He's turning the field into a faction." Another replied, "No, he's turning the people into a shield." But they were both wrong. He wasn't building protection. He was building power, the kind they couldn't see, until it stood over them. The courtroom was full, not with lawyers, with farmers, fishermen, teachers, street vendors, people who had once whispered warnings to a young captain in dusty fields, under broken roofs, behind shaking curtains. Now, they sat upright in clean clothes and open eyes, watching justice unfold. At the defendant's table, 3 generals, clean-shaven, ribboned, silent, once untouchable, now indicted. On the wall above them, projected for all to see, was a document dated 2 years prior. A military order, stamped and signed. Redirect rural surveillance. Civilian reports deemed non-actionable. Below it, images of burned schools, empty villages, mass graves, all consequences of inaction. of mockery, of arrogance. And standing at the witness podium, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. No medals, no promotion pins, just the same calm eyes and dust-worn boots. He held no speech. He didn't need one. He simply looked at the people in the room and said, "You were always right. I just wrote it down." The judges ruled unanimously. Stripped of rank, seized assets, lifetime ban from military service. For once, the warlords didn't go underground. They went to prison. Outside, the crowd didn't cheer. They stood in silence, a kind of collective breath held in for too long, finally exhaled. And then, slowly, applause. Not the wild kind, the steady rising kind. One hand after another, one heart at a time. Weeks later, a new council was sworn in. Not just military, mixed with civilians, elders, youth leaders, community builders. At its head stood Traoré, now president of the transitional government. When asked by a foreign reporter what qualified him for the position, he smiled. I listened. And when asked what his first policy would be, he replied, "Every general must spend 1 month living among the people they claim to protect." At the ceremony's end, an old woman, the same one who once gave him the secret map, pressed a small woven cloth into his hand. Embroidered in fading thread were 3 words: "You heard us." And from the ashes of forgotten voices, a nation had risen, not by force, but by listening.